afternoon. Welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's begin with the top story, which emanates from the United States. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has broken his silence on the controversy over an Indian national being involved in an alleged plot to assassinate Khalistani separatist Gurpatwant Singh Pannun on US soil. In his first public remarks since US federal prosecutors last month announced murder for hire charges against Nikhil Gupta, the Prime Minister has said the allegations that an Indian national conspired to murder American-Canadian citizen and Khalistani terrorist Pannun will be examined, but a few incidents cannot derail ties between India and the United States. In an interview to the Financial Times, Prime Minister Modi said, "If someone gives us any information, we will definitely look into it. If a citizen of ours has done anything good or bad, we are ready to look into it. Our commitment is to the rule of law." There is, however, also strong bipartisan support for the strengthening of the India-US relationship, which is a clear indicator of a mature and stable partnership. The Prime Minister flagged security and cooperation in counterterrorism as key parts of that partnership and said, "I don't think it is appropriate to link a few incidents with diplomatic relations between the two countries." Significantly, the Prime Minister added that India is deeply concerned about the activities of certain extremists based overseas. These elements, under the guise of freedom of expression, have engaged in intimidation and incited violence, he said. Making a broader point, the Prime Minister added, "We need to accept the fact that we are living in the era of multilateralism. The world is interconnected as well as interdependent. This reality compels us to recognize that absolute agreement on all matters cannot be a prerequisite for collaboration." Now, in recent days, US authorities have said that Nikhil Gupta and an Indian government staffer, codenamed CC1, exchanged telephonic and electronic communications starting May this year, in which the latter asked the former to plan the murder. In return, he was promised assistance in dropping a criminal case against him in India. The US prosecutors have alleged that the two men also met in person in New Delhi. Nikhil Gupta is accused of trying to hire a hitman to kill Pannun, but that individual turned out to be an undercover American federal agent. Gupta faces a 20-year jail term if convicted of the murder for hire and conspiracy charges. The US has also accused the Indian government employee in question, whose identity has been withheld. Responding to the charges, India's Foreign Ministry had earlier said India takes such inputs seriously since they impinge on our national security interests. The relevant departments are already examining the issue and a high-level inquiry committee has been established. The White House has repeatedly called on New Delhi to hold those involved in the alleged plot accountable. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the United States looks forward to the results of the Indian government's inquiry. Gupta, held in a Czech prison pending extradition to the US, moved the Supreme Court in India last week, claiming his religious and human rights were violated. The court refused immediate relief and told the petitioner to file a copy with the government before setting the next date of hearing for the 4th of January. This case has prompted renewed scrutiny of allegations earlier made by Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government had said a couple of months ago it had credible allegations that an Indian government official was involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani terrorist and Canadian citizen, in June this year. Later, after the US charges were revealed, Trudeau told the media, "The matter underscores what we've been talking about from the beginning, which is that India needs to take this seriously." India has rubbished Canada's claims as motivated and absurd and told Ottawa this is not the Government of India's policy. It's also pointed out that no concrete evidence has been shared by Canada so far. So, what should be made of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's significant statement on the Pannun case? All right, let's take this across to our guests. Joining me on the show tonight, Ambassador Manju Seth and Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, former Indian diplomats. Welcome to Global Lens. Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, let me start with you. There has been a lot of brouhaha over, first, the allegations that were leveled by Justin Trudeau against India, and then a couple of months later, the United States leveling similar allegations in the Pannun case. Of course, there has been a stark difference in India's response to the two sets of allegations. While Canada's charges have been dismissed as politically motivated, absurd and baseless by India, here in the Pannun case, where the United States is repeatedly asking India to have the matter thoroughly and seriously investigated, you have none other than the Prime Minister of India now issuing a statement saying, yes, we take this matter seriously. If any Indian citizen has done anything wrong, we will certainly look into the matter. We are committed to the rule of law, but at the same time, he has made a significant statement flagging that India is actually deeply concerned about the activities of certain extremist groups based overseas. First and foremost, what do you make of the fact that Prime Minister Modi has now come out and commented on the Pannun case?
Neha, it's a very balanced statement that the Prime Minister has given, in line with what our External Affairs Minister had said earlier, that the information that the US has given to us, those inputs, since those are pretty specific, so we are duty bound as a country respecting democracy to examine those allegations and see to what extent those allegations are true and to what extent those, those persons, in this case, Mr. Nikhil Gupta, was he linked specifically with someone from the government of India? If so, at what capacity? Sometimes you see there could be some people who may indulge in certain actions on their own motivation or on their own sort of provocation. But it has been clarified that it is not the government of India's policy. So all these things will be examined. But more importantly, the Prime Minister has also pointed out that, the kind of statements which are being made from the US or the Canadian soil by these terror elements, by these terrorists, these Khalistani separatists, which are blackmailing or which are sort of threatening India or Air India or Indian entities, our diplomatic missions and others, that of certain actions or certain consequences, these are not admissible, that the concerned countries, in this case the United States and Canada, particularly United States, since it calls itself India's strategic partner, they must take action under their own laws against these persons. And so far they haven't. So that sort of calls into question what kind of strategic relationship is this in which certain people are taking action against the security of our country in on the soil of those countries. And the government of that country is not doing enough or not taking action against these people. So that is also something that the government of the United States and Canada, they should ponder over, they should reflect, that they are duty bound to carry out those actions. What would happen if same thing had happened on the other side? If people in India had made those statements or had acted in that manner? Would United States have accepted our premise that this is freedom of expression? No. They wouldn't have gone to the town. They would have, they would have done what all. So I think that is also a very important aspect. And then, of course, the Prime Minister's statement accepts that it is a multilateral, it is a multipolar world in which power is diffused. Countries have different points of view. We have to respect these points of view. We have to work out wherever we can cooperate. We have to see areas of agreement. And he has expressed the hope that since this is an isolated case, isolated matter, this will not affect the bigger relationship, which I may remind is in the larger interest of both countries, both United States and India. It's not that it's only being driven by India. The United States needs India as much as India needs the United States. So that is where I see the significance of this statement.
Okay. In fact, as you mentioned, the Prime Minister has said that there is strong bipartisan support in the United States for strengthening India-US ties. Few incidents here and there cannot derail this important bilateral relationship. And he's also made the point that, we live in the era of multilateralism, and this reality compels us to recognize that absolute agreements on all matters cannot be a prerequisite for collaboration. In other words, you may have your viewpoint, we have ours. If we're going to be partners, we've got to respect each other's viewpoints. But let me bring in Ambassador Manju Seth at this point. Ambassador Seth, of course, Ambassador Gupta is right in pointing out, America's duplicity and doublespeak, let's say on the issue of terror. And you and I have spoken about this multiple times on this show. How they're going on and on about their citizen, who they refer to as an activist, being under threat, something that India, they say, must seriously investigate, while conveniently ignoring the concerns raised by India over the simple fact that this man has, with impunity, been issuing threats to India and Indians. He has gone so far as to issue threats to Air India and the Indian Parliament. And of course, the ambassador is right in pointing out, had an Indian citizen living here made similar threats to the United States, the US would have probably expected us to put that person behind bars by now. But what do you make of the fact that the Prime Minister, no less, has now issued a statement on the Pannun case?
I think you very rightly said, the US does tend to, have a policy of double speak and double policy on various issues. But on this particular incident, as Prime Minister has very clearly said, it will not derail. One or few incidents or few differences on a few matters will not and should not derail this special relationship. And as Ambassador Gupta rightly said, it is a two-way sort of necessity for both sides to maintain extra good relations with each other, given the disorder in the global order and the fast changing dynamics which are taking, in the geopolitical scenario, how quickly they are changing. Definitely, India and US, the India-US partnership, relationship, strategic partnership, all of it is of equal importance to the US and to India. And I think even the US is cognizant of that, and that is why they are, while telling us to investigate and find out the truth, and we've also said we'll find out the truth, but still the pressure is, sometimes I think there is also an intent to do some messaging that yes, our relationship is important, but it is not on the level, on a very high level, and don't take us for granted. And though they're ready to take us for granted, but they are saying, don't take the relationship for granted. And sometimes I think, what has happened in Canada and what has happened in the US, especially with these so-called Khalistani supporters. I will not call them Khalistanis because they are supporters of this agenda, and they are actually supporters of terror. And the threats that he has issued in no uncertain terms, I think that the US should have taken cognizance of, but I think they have some other reasons which are not very clear at the moment for this kind of messaging that they are doing and putting pressure on India in the Canadian case as well as here, the Niger killing in Canada and this, that India needs to, take cognizance of what we are saying. And they're not bothered about what India is saying. India has been saying, please take action. These people have been indulging in criminal activity. They are, supporters of terrorism and supporters of separatism in India. So I think all these issues are not being taken into consideration by the US. And I think they may have their own reasons behind this. What they are is not very clear at the moment. But both sides will not allow, as very rightly pointed out by you, to allow this relationship to be affected deeply by these incidents. Neha.
Okay, it's interesting what you're saying. You're saying it's quite evident that the US is trying to put pressure on India. The reasons for that may not be entirely clear at this point in time. However, for the Prime Minister of India to actually issue a statement does of course convey that India is treating this matter with a degree of seriousness. The question is, does this put the matter to rest any which way? I need to take a quick break. We'll continue this discussion on the other side.
जब हम करेंगे तो पता लग ही जाएगा सलमान खान का करेंगे मारेंगे यहीं जोधपुर में मारेंगे तो पता लग जाएगा
This is someone who is sitting inside our jails and is still very obviously and openly running and possibly the largest organized criminal operation in the country.
Student organization of Punjab University में सोपू का acting president type भी रहा है.
He was a troublemaker, getting into fights with people, not coming to the class.
As on date, it appears that Lawrence gang is the most important, the prominent gang. Gangs here in Punjab, they are intimidated.
Today he is India's most dangerous gangster, and India's presence are apparently no bar to how Bishnoi runs India's largest criminal empire.
News is now content. Just stream it. Download the world's first news OTT, News9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
Welcome back. We're talking about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's statement on the Pannun controversy and what it means for the India-US ties. All right, let me go back to Ambassador Manju Seth at this point. Ambassador Seth, you know, whether it was the Niger case earlier in Canada or the Pannun case, the alleged plot, assassination plot, you know, we've been talking about how the US has very often exhibited duplicity on multiple fronts. And just for the benefit of our viewers, I want to quickly read out the names of some individuals designated as terrorists by the United States who were taken out on foreign soil by the United States of America. If we could just have that graphic up on the screen. Osama bin Laden, of course, the architect of 9/11, the most high-profile case of the United States going after an enemy on foreign soil. We know that he was killed in a raid conducted in Abbottabad in Pakistan in 2011. In the same year, there was the case of Anwar al-Awlaki being eliminated in a drone strike in Yemen. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of the ISIS was killed by the US Special Forces during a raid in Syria in 2019. In 2020, Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani was killed in a US drone strike in Iraq, I beg your pardon. In 2015, there was a case of 2 British citizens who were believed to be affiliated with ISIS being killed by the United States in a drone strike in Syria. And then there were the French operations in Mali and the Sahel. It's a long list. So let me go back to our guests at this point. Ambassador Manju Seth, you know, while the United States doesn't seem to think much of concerns raised by countries like India with regard to terror and the threats that have been issued to our country by individuals like Niger in the past and Pannun now, look at this long list of individuals that the United States eliminated on foreign soil without batting an eyelid. There was no question in that case of violating another country's sovereignty.
I agree, and as I said earlier also, the US does have a degree of doublespeak on many issues, and particularly on these issues. And we can see that how over the years, as you very rightly pointed out, they have targeted different citizens in their own countries whom they considered as terrorists and whom they had designated as terrorists. And they don't seem to be giving the same importance or credibility to what India has done by designating these people as terrorists, and there have been Interpol notices. We've sent requests to Interpol to have them, to take action and send them back to India. But for various reasons, it has not gone forward. And the US, in its wisdom, should I say, has taken action suo moto individually in all these cases. As you have very rightly mentioned, so many of these people have been killed, whom they considered were a threat to them. So similarly, if they are saying if we have done it, doesn't mean India can do it. And my belief is that I don't think India or Indian government would be involved in this particular killing. I feel, I may be wrong, but my view is it's most probably all these so-called gangs and criminal people who are involved in these activities in the US and in Canada, on both sides, in India and in those countries, for human trafficking, in the drug trade, etc. And they create their own ecosystem of enemies and and targeted whom to kill and how not to kill. I feel that it's probably that, and not in this particular case. They are saying that it is and in this Nikhil Gupta was a double operative, and he said that Indian government has done it. But how true that is, I'm not absolutely sure. I have my sort of reservations on that. But if the evidence is there and if it's examined by the Indian government and something comes out of it, but I think whatever action has to be taken, the Indian government will definitely take. And we must again and again point out to the US, without really spoiling our relationship, but point out to them that they must take cognizance of our concerns as well on these issues, on terrorism and other things. But I think the US thinks it is the number one power and it is entitled to do what it wants. Other countries are not.
Absolutely. Ambassador Gupta, I just listed a long list of individuals, including Osama bin Laden, who the United States had no compunction taking out after entering other countries, because these men were considered terrorists by the United States and as threats to their national interests. At that time, of course, the United States did not worry about violating another country's sovereignty. So what is the larger message here? That America's terrorist is a terrorist, but India's terrorist is an activist? Also, as Ambassador Seth says, it seems like there are these provocations from the United States, first in the Niger case, now in the Pannun case, these repeated attempts to put pressure on India. Why do you think, the United States is doing what it's doing?
Well, I think, Neha, the United States is passing through a very difficult time internally. There are a lot of factions in the Democratic Party. Some elements of which are opposed to what President Biden is trying to do in terms of improving relations with India. There are other elements in the establishment or the deep state, as they say, maybe some in the State Department or some in the intelligence community, some in the academic community, and others who have their own views or different views about the relationship with India. Some may think that possibly the United States is giving a bit far too much to India than what it is getting from India. But there are all kinds of views in the United States. And President Biden is having a difficult time at home because his popularity rating is low. So some of his policies, for instance, in Ukraine or in case of Israel's war against Hamas, have been very unpopular, and these have been criticized or these have been opposed by certain elements in the both Democratic Party and the Republicans. So he is on defensive. There is also a view that the United States maybe gave too much to India on the issue of the G20 and so on. So I think there is a certain amount of backtracking, or there is a certain amount of retrenching on what they had done earlier. And of course, there are those double standards too. As the number one power, global power, it has different standards. It doesn't want other countries like India or others to do what it does. So there are, of course, those double standards. And then we have to sort of point out these things. We have to convey our opposition to those policies, as the Prime Minister has done or as our Foreign Minister has done. So we have to express our concern. But at the end of the day, we have to see that we have to examine. It's a very important relationship. We have to see, the pluses and minuses. We have to see where we are, to what extent our interests are being served by this relationship. So that is where we are.
All right. We'll have to, of course, wait and see how this case pans out. At the end of the day, the charges that are being leveled by the US prosecutors will need to stand up in a court of law. And could this impact the India-US relationship? We certainly hope that won't be the case. That is the hope that the Prime Minister of India has expressed in his statement on the Pannun case. And it's interesting, Ambassador Gupta talked about Donald Trump, because that's the man we're going to talk about in our next segment. I'll request Ambassadors Manju Seth and Yogesh Gupta to stay on with us. Time for us to slip into a quick break, but don't go anywhere. On the other side, yet another legal setback to Donald Trump ahead of the 2024 presidential elections.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Bangalore traffic is an example of something that has gone wrong with our system.
We have more than 50 flyovers in Bangalore city. If flyover is a solution to traffic problem, Bangalore should not have traffic problem.
According to TomTom Traffic Index 2022, Bangalore is ranked as the second worst city in the world when it comes to traffic.
The speed limit at the ORR is 80 kilometers per hour, but our vehicle has only moved 10 kilometers per hour.
What Bangalore needs is a surgery, but what we have been offered repeatedly are band-aids.
Only on the world's first news OTT. News9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
Since the last 2 years, Khalistani terror groups are threatening Indian diplomats in Canada, US, UK and Australia. Investigations of these threats led us to the first ever abduction and killing of an Indian diplomat, Ravindra Matre, in UK's Birmingham in 1984. Our months-long investigation finally led us to the murderer of Ravindra Matre, who has been hiding in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for the last 40 years. Watch our exclusive documentary, Murder of an Indian Diplomat, where we reveal the man who killed Ravindra Matre.
Stop searching, start streaming. Download the world's first news OTT, News9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा।
There's certainly a wall of capital coming into the clean tech, climate tech space, not just in India but across the world.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now get you the big political story from the United States. In a sensational development in American politics, the Colorado Supreme Court has disqualified former President Donald Trump from the ballot in the state's presidential election next year. This is in connection with Trump's role in the 6th January 2021 attack on the US Capitol by his supporters. The ruling makes Trump the first presidential candidate in US history to be deemed ineligible for the White House under a rarely used provision of the US Constitution that bars officials who have engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding office. The court concluded that the US Constitution bars the frontrunner for the Republican nomination in 2024 from appearing on the ballot because of his role in instigating violence against the US government and an attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The court said the ruling has been stayed until the 4th of January next year to allow for appeals. The ruling applies only to Colorado's 5th March Republican primary, not across the United States. But its conclusion would likely impact Trump's status for the 5th November general election next year. Non-partisan US election forecasters view Colorado as safely Democratic, meaning that President Biden will likely carry the state regardless of Trump's fate. The case was brought by a group of Colorado voters aided by the group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, who argued that Trump should be disqualified for inciting his supporters to attack the Capitol in a failed attempt to obstruct the transfer of presidential power to Joe Biden after the 2020 election. Trump's campaign has called the court decision flawed and undemocratic and said it would be appealed. Trump's campaign has condemned the 14th Amendment challenges as an attempt to deny millions of voters their preferred choice for president. The decision is a victory for advocacy groups and anti-Trump voters who've mounted several similar legal challenges to Trump's candidacy under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which was enacted after the Civil War in the United States. A lawyer for Trump argued that the riot at the Capitol was not serious enough to qualify as an insurrection, and that Trump's remarks to his supporters in Washington that day were protected by his right to free speech. The lawyer argued that courts do not have the authority to order Trump removed from the ballot. Advocates have hoped to use this case to boost a wider disqualification effort and potentially put the issue before the US Supreme Court. But remember, the US Supreme Court's 6-3 conservative majority includes 3 Trump appointees. And guess who has expressed the most vociferous support for Trump in the wake of this ruling? Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, who has vowed to pull out from the Colorado ballot if the state Supreme Court does not let Donald Trump contest. Ramaswamy has also urged other Republican candidates to withdraw from the Colorado polls immediately if the court doesn't reinstate Trump on the ballot. Calling the ruling an illegal maneuver, the Indian American leader said it would have disastrous consequences for the United States. But here's something to consider. A Tuesday poll from the New York Times and Siena College found that Trump had a 46% to 44% lead over the sitting president. Trump's lead was even more drastic among younger voters who favored Trump, 49% to 43%. That poll's findings echoed surveys conducted in the month of November as well. Not only that, the newest CNBC All-America Economic Survey found that Donald Trump has a 5-point lead with Latino voters against Biden compared with Biden's 7-point lead over Trump just in the month of October.
Today, the radical left Democrats and their allies in the fake news media, right back there, all those people with the cameras, are having an absolute meltdown because last night our campaign won a gigantic court victory in Colorado.
The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021 was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
All right, so what does this ruling mean for Trump's campaign and for the 2024 US presidential election. Let's go back to our guests. We still have with us Ambassador Yogesh Gupta and Ambassador Manju Seth. Ambassador Gupta, starting with you. Of course, this is not the first time that Donald Trump has suffered a legal setback, but there is something about this man. Every time he suffers a legal setback, if you look at the polls, he actually emerges stronger. He seems to gain greater sympathy and support among his support base. The question is, how significant legally and from the standpoint of the US presidential election do you think this ruling is? Of course, as of now, it's applicable only to Colorado, which is anyway seen as a democratic state, a blue state. But do you think it could have a domino effect across other states, and the matter could in fact end up at the doorstep of the US Supreme Court, but then there too Trump has a clear advantage?
Oh, you are right, Neha. You see, the most important thing is that it shows that the US judicial process is completely and heavily politicized. You know, the judges over there, whether in the state Supreme Courts or the federal Supreme Courts, they are more often giving judgments on the basis of their political affiliations, which is really a bit worrisome. Because this kind of a ruling by the Colorado Supreme Court can be repeated by the other states, by the Supreme Courts in other states. And now, as far as the federal Supreme Court is concerned, that, as per the American media, is heavily dominated by the conservatives. So, which means that it is likely to support the former President Trump. But again, that is something to be seen. But the more important thing is that with the states' Supreme Courts taking different positions and all across the United States, the country is going to get more politically divided than ever before. And some parties, some Republicans, for instance, have already started saying that it is not the business of the courts, you know, whether the state courts or the federal courts, to pronounce on a matter like this. It is for the voters of the United States to decide whether Mr. Trump should be able to fight the elections or not. So there are those kind of views. But I think the most important thing is that this is going to create a lot of instability, both in the United States as well as globally. Because, see, the United States is involved so quickly, so substantively in Ukraine. It is involved in supporting Israel in its war against the Hamas. It is so heavily involved in its rivalry with China and so on. So, what happens to the US and its allies? What do the allies do? I mean, where do they go? What sort of message they get? And what happens, the kind of policies that former President Trump projected earlier, and he is expected to resume, and some say even more fiercely than earlier. What happens if he gets elected and he starts pursuing those policies? And so it puts the US allies and partners in a very, very difficult predicament as to what kind of approach they should take. So this is completely going to politicize and completely going to destabilize, the situation in the United States and globally. And 2024 is going to be a very difficult year, as we have already seen so many regional states resorting to terror, resorting to conflicts, resorting to rivalries, and the US-China rivalries is going forward more than ever before, despite all these meetings at San Francisco and so on. So I think this next year is going to be very difficult year for everyone, particularly the US and other countries.
Well, yeah, that's an alarming scenario, but you're quite right in pointing out the very serious implications that all of this could have, both for the United States and for the world at large, given that you have multiple wars that are currently raging, and given how Trump has already proved to be such a deeply polarizing, perhaps the single most polarizing political figure in American history. We saw that between 2016 and 2020. And we'll have to wait and see what happens in 2024. Let me go across to Ambassador Seth. Ambassador Seth, should Americans be, concerned about, as Ambassador Yogesh Gupta said, the courts in the US delivering their rulings along political lines? We know which way the Colorado court has voted. We know which way the US Supreme Court could vote. Or, as he points out, is the larger worry about how destabilizing these factors could be, especially given some of the, if I may say, very, very alarming and dangerous statements that Trump himself has been making, which seem like a direct threat to democracy itself. But we know that no matter how many legal setbacks the man suffers, he seems to emerge stronger every single time and more popular with his vote base.
Absolutely, and I think what you're saying, his popularity is increasing every time, and especially after every legal, the previous legal setbacks that he had. After that, again, he was able to bounce back with a lot of support, and the support seems to be increasing again, amongst the voters. And another factor which I think could be a reason for his support is also the fact that immigration into the US has impacted jobs and local production and manufacturing over the years. And the fact that during President Joe Biden's presidency, again, after a long time, America is again involved in wars overseas, including, involved in the sense it's supporting them, and it is somehow, not able to step back. It's still supporting the war and not trying to find a solution either in the Ukraine case or in Ukraine war or in the Israel-Hamas war. And knowing full well that the US has a voice, it can influence these things and should be able to influence them, considering that it is, the most powerful country in the world at the moment. It's a numero uno at the moment. And what is happening everywhere, and within the United States, definitely there's a lot of worry amongst the voters, amongst Republican supporters, and even amongst others in regarding the direction in which the US is heading. If it's getting involved in wars overseas and not having enough, manufacturing and jobs within the country, it is definitely a cause for concern, because, the young people are without jobs. Right. There's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of, unrest because of this, or dissatisfaction because of all these issues.
But perhaps, yes, but perhaps the most worrying factor is how America has been such a deeply divided country in an unprecedented way since 2016. That really should be the biggest worry for Americans. Very quickly, Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, what do you make of the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy seems to be so concerned about Donald Trump not being, being booted off the Colorado ballot, saying, I'm going to withdraw as well unless he's reinstated on the ballot. He's emerged as a Trump champion. Is he very optimistic, you think, about being on the Trump ticket in 2024 as the vice presidential pick? Does he fancy his chances, you think?
Well, there can be all possibilities, the Indian community is big. It has a lot of influence. By taking that sort of a position, I think Ramaswamy is not only ensuring that he gets support from the Republican voters, he's also endearing himself to ex-President Trump. So there could be all sorts of possibilities that if not his vice president, if Trump, if elected, could give him something else. So there are all sorts of possibilities, and since people are taking positions on political lines, it's not surprising what Ramaswamy has done. I mean, he's only supported his own party's candidates, and so that is quite, I think, he has done well for himself.
All right. Some might argue that most Republican candidates seem to be steering clear of directly attacking Donald Trump if you look at how the presidential debates have gone so far. But clearly, Vivek Ramaswamy seems to be the strongest supporter for Donald Trump. And come to think of it, Trump also seems to be quite impressed. When he was asked whether he could be a potential VP nominee, Trump did not rule it out. Final question to you, Ambassador Manju Seth. All the recent polls seem to suggest that Donald Trump is leading Biden. Poll after poll seems to suggest that, regardless of all his legal troubles, of the multiple trials that he's likely to face in 2024, how worried do you think the Democrats need to be?
All accounts, yes, the Democrats need to be really worried because as of now, the support for ex-President Donald Trump is really very high. And as I mentioned, because of all these concerns, immigration and unemployment, all these are factors, and especially among the young, it is a big factor. And they are not able to, they do not support the current government, the US government's approach to, in getting involved in wars all across, in other countries far away, and not creating enough opportunities within the country, including with China. There's worry that even with China, they are not able to find, a solution and the current asymmetry in their trade, etc. They're not able to tackle that. So there's a lot of, dissatisfaction amongst, of course, as very rightly mentioned, generally the voters are very divided as Democrat supporters and Republican supporters. But some people have been I've heard from some people that even many of the Democrat supporters are of the view that maybe Trump may be better for the US. Given that,
I think that should be very alarming for the Democrats if it's come to a point where the Democrats think that Trump may be better for the country. I can understand Democrats being concerned about Biden's age. But if some of them actually think that Trump may be better for the country, then that should be a very alarming scenario for the Democratic Party.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, I'm completely out of time, but it's been a pleasure having both of you on the show. Ambassador Manju Seth and Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, thank you so much for joining me. Look forward to having you back on Global Lens.
The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
All right, let's now shift our focus to the Israel-Hamas war. As the war enters the 75th day, Hamas's political chief is visiting key mediator Egypt soon after Israel said it had a proposed week-long truce in fighting in Gaza in exchange for the release of 40 hostages, a similar deal to the one last month that brought a temporary truce. The head of Hamas's political bureau, Ismail Haniyeh, has arrived in Cairo for talks with Egyptian officials. The released hostages would include women, the elderly and those in need of urgent care, though no agreement has been arrived at yet. Israel is currently asking for all remaining hostages to be released as part of any deal, while a temporary ceasefire as part of the deal could last for a week or 2 weeks. On Tuesday, the Quds Brigades, the armed wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, released a video showing hostages 79-year-old Gadi Moses and 47-year-old Gadi Kadzir asking the Israeli government to arrange their release. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council is expected to vote tonight on a resolution to spur more humanitarian aid into Gaza. Intensive negotiations have been underway for the draft resolution, which was said to have originally included a call for a cessation of hostilities. The vote has been delayed as diplomats work on language that would gain a yes or at least an abstention from the United States, which vetoed a previous ceasefire motion. Israeli military officials have said they believe they are close to defeating Hamas in Jabalia and Gaza City's Shujaya neighborhood, Hamas's last remaining strongholds in northern Gaza. At least 20 people were killed and 25 others injured in Israeli attacks on the Jabalia refugee camp today, according to the Hamas-controlled health ministry. The UN has said half of Gaza's population is starving and residents are often going entire days without eating under Israel's bombardment of the enclave of 2.3 million people. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder has warned that children and families are not safe even in hospitals in Gaza as the enclave's wider healthcare system teeters on the edge of collapse. 3 Palestinian telecom firms have announced that communications and internet services in the Gaza Strip are down again, one of which cited continuous aggression as the reason for the outage.
Bottom line is, these attacks have to stop. They need to stop. They're unacceptable. The United States, our allies and our partners, will do what we have to do to counter these threats and to protect these ships. We haven't seen any specific targeting or intention to target naval vessels. But you can't, when a commanding officer is looking at something coming in, a drone or a missile, I mean, he or she has to make some oftentimes split-second decisions about perceiving what the threat is and taking them down. So you can't rule it out specifically. But when you're talking about these 14 drones, I mean, it's not unlike them to launch multiple at a time, and it's difficult to know when you're knocking them out of the air. It's difficult to know exactly what their intended target was. In general, and this is why we set up this task force, it is clear that the Houthis are, at the very least, conducting a concerted effort to go after merchant shipping in the Red Sea.
All right, as we wrap up this edition of Global Lens, let's get you a story from India's neighborhood, Pakistan. Former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is making headlines for his scathing remarks about the country's all-powerful military. In a conversation with his party workers, Sharif, who's eyeing an unprecedented 4th term as Prime Minister, minced no words as he recounted his tumultuous journey marked by 3 ousters from power in 1993, 1999 and 2017. Directly targeting the military establishment, Nawaz Sharif made a bold assertion blaming internal factors for Pakistan's woes while dismissing the role of external entities like India, the United States and Afghanistan. He said, today, where Pakistan has reached, this has not been done by India, the US or even Afghanistan. In fact, we have shot ourselves in the foot. They imposed a selected government on this nation by rigging the 2018 polls that led to the suffering of the people and the downfall of the economy. Sharif directly accusing the military of orchestrating a rigged 2018 election, plunging the country into suffering and economic despair. He said the judges garland them and legitimize their rule when they violate the constitution. When it comes to a prime minister, the judges stamp his ouster. The judges also approve the act of dissolution of parliament. Why? Sharif did not spare the judiciary either, lambasting the judges for allegedly legitimizing military interventions while questioning their motives in approving actions against elected leaders. He specifically targeted former ISI Chief General Faiz Hamid, attributing his own ouster from power in 2017 to Hamid's influence and alleged interference. He said a case has been opened in the Supreme Court against those who had said that if Nawaz came out of jail, their 2 years of hard work would be wasted. Now, this isn't the first time that Nawaz Sharif has accused the military of undue influence. His recent return from a self-imposed exile marked a resurgence in his confrontations with the army establishment. He recently gained legal victories, being acquitted in corruption cases involving Al Azizia Steel Mill and Avonfield properties, further boosting his political standing. While referring to the army, Sharif said, they visited the residences of senior judges and threatened them. They achieved the required court verdicts against me through coercion. He didn't stop there. Sharif recalled a 1999 incident saying, I was Prime Minister in the morning and in the evening I was declared a hijacker. Similarly, in 2017, I was ousted from power for not taking salary from my son. He added they made this decision as they wanted to bring their selected man into power, referring to his arch-rival, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Supremo, Imran Khan. Well, it certainly promises to be a fascinating election in Pakistan. Well, Nawaz Sharif saying, let's not blame India for our woes. High time Pakistan realized that. Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honey